Hi, my name is Sina, and for my submission to this year's Art in A-Life, I want to present a project that I'm tinkering with, that I've been using to better understand how neural networks work, and which I've been using to create procedurally generated audio reactive visuals. A few years ago, when I was first introduced to the A-Life community, I was intrigued by some of the many creative uses and implementations of neural networks. Specifically, I was interested in compositional pattern producing networks, and so I decided to find some code and tutorials to really let me explore all the nitty-gritty details. I came across the beautiful tutorial by David Ha on generating abstract patterns with TensorFlow, and from there I began rewriting bits and pieces to see how the behavior of the network would change as I tinkered with the architecture and details of the neural network. The inherently beautiful thing about these types of neural networks, which are called CPPNs for short, is that they can very readily produce images in arbitrary resolution or dimensionality. The general idea is to have a neural network that takes as input some n-dimensional vector and spits out some other k-dimensional vector. If I feed this neural network a set of n-dimensional coordinates that are a function of the location of pixels in an image, I can map the outputs of the neural network onto those coordinates to make an image. And if I choose k to be 1, then I could interpret the output as grayscale values, or if I choose k to be 3, I can interpret the output as the values of the red, green, blue channels of an image. Making these images, for me, is like a glimpse into the underbelly of these mystical neural networks, and really lets me see how they move and react. Here is a simple example with a one-dimensional input vector, say using only the x-coordinate of a 2D plane. We can also see how it looks with only a y-coordinate or a radial coordinate. It looks kind of nice when there's some symmetry, isn't there? But we can also add more dimensions. What if we use 3? Let's say an x, a y, and a radial one r. There are a lot of overlapping patterns in these images, and a lot of that has to do with the coordinate system we use. But there's also the details that make up the neural network itself. I tinkered a bit with the number of layers, or the number of neurons, or the coordinates I would feed the network as inputs, the activation functions of the neural networks, and so on and so forth, until I could experience visually and on a slightly more intuitive level the effects these choices would have on the quality of the output. During my studies, I even ran a small experiment to measure if one could relate some statistical properties of these images, or the properties of the neural networks that generate them, to how they are aesthetically perceived by a sample of people. If you'd like, you can look up this paper to check out the experiment. After experimenting with a bunch of different ways to tweak the model, I found the most satisfying thing to play with was the latent vector. This is simply a global variable that is concatenated to the vector of input coordinates that go into the network. Using this, I can create sets of images within a single model by randomizing this vector. Or better yet, I can create animations by moving through the latent space smoothly. And even more satisfying is to move in periodic cycles in the space. However, even this got boring eventually, and I wanted a way to make cycles in latent space that were more chaotic than random sinusoids, but still had some kind of structure or rhythm. It seemed natural then to use music to drive the trajectories in latent space. I would take the spectrum of a song at every frame, split it into a bunch of frequency bands, and use the amplitudes in those bands to drive a periodic function. With the help of some more excellent tutorials, I was able to make a shader and a sort of user interface for my workflow. Now I could prototype in real time. With this setup, I had a sort of sandbox where I could explore these neural networks and how they interacted when driven by music. I could tweak how much each frequency band maps to motion in the latent space, or if I wanted my coordinate space to include noise or other geometry, I could do that too. And so the model became my little dancing robot. I could then use it to express within its expressibility and within my ability to control that, the rhythms and feelings I resonated with when I heard music. And so for this year's Art in A-Life, I'm proud to present this synesthetic, dancing CPPN robot that I've been playing with for the last 2 years, paired with some songs and some moods that I found myself in the same time. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for listening.